So welcome, welcome. It's so nice to see you all, especially our first-time visitors. We know that it's no coincidence that you all are here, that everyone is here with a purpose and a reason, and I'm just affirming that as you hear the message today and the music and the people you meet, that you say, that's why I was there today. That's exactly why I was there today. So, living the science of mind. That is our theme for this month. It Centers for Spiritual Living, and I'm Reverend Cindy Grimes, for those of you who are first-time visitors. And I'm a minister here, have been for a couple of years now. And Centers for Spiritual Living has a curriculum, essentially, that the ministers can choose to use if they want to or not. It's always voluntary. And the themes are different every month. And I choose to do the themes because I think there is an energy that's built when people are talking about and thinking about and praying on the same kinds of things. So to know that there are people in San Francisco and people all over the country that are talking about this theme this morning, I think it adds a little something extra to it. So our theme for this month with Centers for Spiritual Living is actually living the science of mind. That's the philosophy that we teach here. And the talk for today, the talk title, is called Science, Superstition, and Common Sense. I love the title. And all of our talks for this year actually are coming from this book that is also called Living the Science of Mind. It's a series of essays written by Ernest Holmes, who is the founder of this philosophy. And there's, I don't even know how many, maybe 200 in here. They're all different lengths. They go from half a page to about 5 pages at the max. And the talk for today comes from an essay that's only about 2.5 pages, but it's really juicy and it's got a lot of good stuff. So I'm excited to share it with you. Last week, we talked about becoming like children. That wasn't the topic of the talk. The talk was actually using that power and presence. As we say, everything is holy now, that the power of spirit that runs in and around and through all things, that's all well and good to say, but then it's like, how do we actually use that? You know, that may be true, but how do we consciously take advantage of that so that we can live the lives that we want to live? And so my talk last week was about becoming more like that childlike presence that we all were at one time. Remember when you were a kid and everything was possible? And maybe you were going to be a firefighter and an astronaut and a ninja all at the same time. Can anyone remember those days? Or a ballerina and a nurse and a teacher, like everything was possible. So the idea is to come back into that place of awe and love and joy of life, enthusiasm, excitement. You know, if something happens to me, I don't know. We're going to talk about that. Anyway, so becoming like children, the idea is to recognize that power and presence that's in and around and through all things. To get back to that place of awe and joy and excitement. And then to remember what your relationship is to that. That each and every one of us are individualized expressions of that one great power. You know, like drops of water in the ocean. No one drop is the whole ocean, but each one is part of the ocean. And just like that, we are part of that spirit. And spirit is here to express through each and every one of us in a way that is completely unique for each one. And we're here to remember that, that we are God's stuff. That we are the eyes and ears and the mouth and the voice and the hands and feet of Spirit itself. And we're here to express that. So remember that. We're here to be receptive. You know, in order to use that power and presence, even though you're part of it and you're using it all the time, you may not be aware of that. It doesn't work until you recognize that and be open to it and welcome it and say, Spirit, work through me here and now. And so being receptive to it. And then there are times when life happens and you get off track. You may have your dream, your goal, what it is that you want to accomplish, and then life takes you off in another direction. So what do? You redirect. You refocus. Just like your GPS tells you to do when you make the wrong turn. And it doesn't yell at you, does it? It doesn't tell you you're wrong or you're a bad person or anything like that. It just tells you that, to redirect when you get to the next turn. Make a U-turn. We just redirect. So that's what it's about. You have to know what your ultimate goal is. We need to know what our values are, what it is that we want to achieve, and who we are to be in this world. That's a very important thing. So that you know where you're headed, and then you focus on that. And then when you get off track, you can refocus on it. And so that's what we talked about last week. And as you know, we all come into this world excited, enthusiastic, happy, joyous. You know, I told you I've got my 2 grandbabies, and from the moment their eyes are open, they're up and ready to go. And they're jumping in their cribs, and they're so excited, and it's like, come get me, and what is there that I can get into today? Right? They're always up for that next thing, always looking and moving, but then something happens, because we all started out that way, didn't we? Hello? You're just making you're proving my point right now. What happened to the joy and the enthusiasm? Are you awake? Are you here? Yes. Something happened, right? What happened? It's like life happens. Right? Does life happen? Yes. You've got all that excitement and enthusiasm, and you're going to take over the world. There's nothing you can do. And then life kind of has its way of slapping you around a little bit, knocking you down. Can anyone relate to that? Does that happen to anybody here? Yes. Okay, I see the hands now. All right, we're awake. Okay, so at the very first thing that Ernest says in this chapter here, this one, is that it seems as though we were born to be superstitious because we inherit the legacy of the entire race mind. It's like, even though we're born, we're part of that source, right? We're all part of that presence. We all come in with that. It seems like something happens when we take this bodily form, right? There is something from the moment that we're born. You know, when you're in the womb, everything's taken care of. You get out. Now it's like, oh, wait, now I have to work for food. I have to scream. It's not just here anymore. And things happen. Things happen. So Ernest Holmes calls it the race consciousness, that we come into this world and there's already kind of a setup. There's a setup that we come into it. So I'm going to share a little bit with you about what that means, that idea of race consciousness. Now this is psychology. You all maybe have seen this analogy before of the iceberg, that we have our conscious mind, our conscious thought. That's what we deal with day to day. Then we have our subconscious. That's the stuff that's underneath the surface, the things that happen that you kind of put in the back burner. You don't think about it. It goes in that subconscious mind. Then you've got your unconscious mind, which is the stuff that you're not even aware of that's happening behind the scenes. Right? It's like those programs that are running on your computer that you're not actively using, but they're running in the background. That's kind of like what your unconscious is. Well, there's another piece, and this comes from Carl Jung, that is called the collective unconscious. How many of you have heard that term before? Collective unconscious. That comes from Carl Jung. I'm going to explain that a little more. The collective unconscious is part of that human psyche that's shared by all of humanity. Right? As we become human beings, we come into this earthly form, there are kind of rules that go with the game of life on earth. Right? And we all are part of that collective unconscious, so part of the human psyche that we all share. It's comprised of the thoughts, memories, and emotions that are inherited from the sum total of human experience. That means anything that's ever happened to human beings, because we believe that everything begins in consciousness, that everything is consciousness. So it just follows then that every thought, every idea, every emotion, everything that people have been through is kind of out there in the ether someplace. Right? It doesn't just disappear. We know, right, that energy is never created or destroyed. It only changes form. You've heard that all. Everybody's heard that, right? Right? So all of those thoughts, all of that energy, everything is kind of out there somewhere. And Jung's theory is that it goes into what he called the collective unconscious and what Ernest Holmes called the race consciousness. It's essentially the same thing. And that collective unconscious is expressed through archetypes. I use the analogy of the game board, right? If life is a game, you've got your game piece, that's your body, right? That's your vehicle, that's how you get around the board. And then the format of the game itself is like the archetype. You know, there's lots of different games you could play. You could play Monopoly, you could play Life, you could play all different kinds of games. And maybe there are games going on in other realms. I don't know, other planets or other dimensions or other something. But the game that we're playing here, you know, it looks like that. Then it's then that's the archetype of the game. That's the setup of the game. I'm not sure I'm making sense. Can you nod?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, so so things, I'll tell you some archetypes. It's the mother figure, for example, the father figure. You see those in every culture. Every culture. It's part of the framework, so to speak, of life on earth. We have other things. If anybody does like tarot cards or you play cards, you see that those, the king, the queen, the joker, those kinds of things, the healer, all of those things are archetypes that we find across cultures. And from time, you know, as long as there have been people that we've seen these kinds of things. So archetypes, that's how this kind of works, is through archetypes. The form of the world into which a person is born is already inborn in him as a virtual image. That's what Carl Jung said. So for those of you who are gamers, you can put it in that perspective, right? Think about a video game that you play. You can play lots of different games, but the game itself that you're playing has certain rules and it has certain structure to it. So that's the idea behind the collective unconscious. It's what we all inherit. We didn't create this game, right? But we're all playing the same one. Everyone in here, to some degree, is playing that same game because we're all part of that collective unconscious. So if the collective unconscious is a repository of all of the emotion and the thought and the dramas and the traumas and the good and the bad and the ugly of humanity, there's a lot of stuff in there. There's an awful lot of stuff in there. And a lot of it's not good. Well, I would say that a lot of it, not that it's not good, that we're setting up that polarity, but a lot of it makes life difficult. Again, we come into this world raring to go, excited, can conquer anything, and life happens, and this is part of it, because we come in not only inheriting our family traumas and dramas and situations, but an ancestral kind of a thing that we come in as part of being human beings on planet Earth. So one of those ideas that comes into our collective unconscious, hitting the wrong button. Sorry about that. Is that idea. Has anybody heard that idea? How many of you went to church for many years because of fear of that? Well, I had a lot of fun looking for some icons and ideas that we could talk about around this topic, and I thought that was pretty funny. That's supposed to that gets people to church. I was going to say it's supposed to. It does get some people to church, doesn't it? It says there, hell is for eternity. How to avoid it comes from Romans 10, 8 through 10, and that's what they're going to be discussing that morning at church. John 3:16, Jesus came so you would not have to be here in hell. Not here in hell, but to be here in hell. I don't know, maybe if I preach more like that, we might have a full house, huh? Okay. All right.
No.
Then there's this one. I really like that because can you see from the back? It's the angel, and he's tossing this poor guy into the fires. God only knows what he did. And yeah, that's not pretty. Then there was this one. Not believing in hell doesn't lower the temperature down there 1 degree. That might get some people to church. And then there's this one. I just thought this was hilarious. I don't know if you can see it or not, but that's a very famous picture, a very famous image of Jesus. He's knocking at the door. And you know, the knob is not there because you're supposed to open it from the inside. So someone put these little captions on it, and at the top it says, "Let me in." That's Jesus, let me in. The next one says, "Why?" coming from the other side of the door. Then he says, "So I can save you." And they say, "From what?" He says, "From what I'm going to do if you don't let me in." And then there's this little quote, which I love. Again. Religion is for people afraid of going to hell. Spirituality is for people who've been there. Yes. How many of you can relate to that? I thought this was great. You know, what Ernest Holmes song says about this. Now keep in mind, Science of Mind has been around now for 100 years. So I'm not sure exactly when this essay was written, but this is what he says. He says, there was a time when theology taught that there was a devil, a hell, a limbo, a purgatory, and a paradise. There was a time when that happened? Wow. It's still happening. Still happening. He says, because ages on end believed this, it created a pattern in the collective unconscious which influenced everyone. Has that influenced anyone? Has that theology, has that idea influenced anyone? It may have influenced some of you very, very directly in this room, right? But it has influenced all of us to some extent. Just, again, because of being born in the time and the place and where we are. You know, I have friends and family that I share this with philosophy with. And I have one in particular. She's so fun and sweet. We had this great conversation, and she's all into it, and she says, what you say makes so much sense, but I'm not sure. So just to play it safe, you know, to make sure that I don't go to that fiery place, I'm going to keep doing what I do. which is everyone's prerogative, right? Right? Yes. What's that? Yeah, it's everyone's prerogative. So I call that kind of theory fire insurance. But we don't need the fire insurance here, right? We don't need the fire insurance. We don't have to believe in the superstition. And well, again, the title of this talk is Science, Superstition, and Common Sense. So we need to bring a little bit of common sense into this conversation. So true religion, true science, and true common sense should go hand in hand. Ernest Holmes said that. So that's what our philosophy is based on, this idea that when truth is true, when it is in fact truth, that it's going to be true from a scientific perspective, it's going to be true philosophically, that you can reason it out, that you can use your mind and your thoughts and it makes sense, and that it feels right, that intuitively it is right, and it bears out in your experience. And for the mystics that have a direct revelation, that it is true in that regard as well. So all the way across the board. How is it that we know what we know? You ever think about that? How do you know the things that you know? Now, if you've been coming for a while, you know I've talked about this before. And it is those four things. We know because we observe, because of what we see. Right? We know because we have reason, and we have logic, and we can think things through. We know because we have feeling, because we have emotion. How many of you know things in the pit of your stomach, that something's up, before you know it up here, before someone even speaks? That is a very valid way of knowing that we don't give enough credence to in the world, I will say. You know, everything in our world tends to be about logic and reason, and if I can't see it, it's not real. But there is a whole other aspect to life. That what we're saying is that here we acknowledge and we appreciate all those ways of knowing. So whatever your belief is, whatever your thought about life and your personal theology, I would just encourage you to hold it up to those things. Does it make sense? Right? Like logically? Does it bear out in my observation of the world? Does it feel right? Does it feel right? Does it ring true for me? And it's what the mystics have said, that at the core of everything there is, that there is oneness. That is the truth that's behind all of the seeming, all of the diversity, and all of the differences, that there is a oneness at the core of our being. But it's not always easy in a world of confusion, superstition, and unbelief to maintain an independent position in one's thought. So most of you laughed as I showed all those pictures of hell and damnation and whatever. So I'm going to assume that we are all on a similar wavelength as far as that goes. Now that's not what a lot of people believe. That's probably how we believe in here is probably not how most folks are believing out there. We know that, yes? Would you agree?
Yes.
Right? How many of you have trouble explaining to your family what we're all about? I see the hands on that one. So it's not easy. It's not always easy in this world of confusion and superstition to kind of hold your ground and go against the grain. But it's essential. It's essential because, as Thoreau said, the mass of men lead lives of desperation. Do you want to be like everyone else? Do you want to be as miserable? Do you want to be in that fear and pain and superstition? So therefore, question. Question everything. Question everything. And I love this. Don't be silly. News isn't meant to stimulate independent thinking. News is intended to stimulate group feelings. How many of you are watching that news? You got it on the TV every day, you know. I know people, it's on like 24/7. What is that message that's coming in? And you have to think about, what is the motivation behind that message? Is it really for your well-being? Is it really to uplift you? Or is it maybe to sell advertising? or to promote a particular agenda? So be careful what you allow into your mind. Be careful. And don't be looking to conform. It's not a good place. It's not a good place. It is not easy to stand in your own strength and your own knowing, but it is essential. And what you do when it's tough out there is you come back from time to time to a place like this where there are people who understand and believe the same thing, that can uplift you and encourage you and support you. That is what I see this place as. It's the place where we come to plug in. You get energized and you go out into the world and you do your thing. And sometimes it'll smack you around a little bit, it'll beat you down. Guess what you do? You come back here and you plug in with your friends again, right? You meditate. You meditate. There's lots of things we can do. So, if hell is essentially a state of consciousness, actually I probably didn't talk about that, did I? So hell, in our philosophy, is not a fiery place someplace in the middle of the earth or who knows where it's supposed to be. Hell is a state of consciousness. Hell is a state of being that you can be in anytime. Anybody been in hell?
Yes.
I've been there. And I visit still from time to time. I just don't stick around there anymore. I don't have to. I know my way out. Sometimes I go in on purpose. Sometimes I go into somebody else's hell for a little while. For a little bit, just to help them out. Just to help pull them through. If indeed they want to come out. You know, because some people like to wallow in that stuff. Some like it there. But I'm willing to step in to somebody else's hell situation for a little while and give them some direction and say, this is how you come out of this. Renee's going, yeah, I've been there with you, honey. We've spent some time there. So hell is a state of consciousness. It's a state of being. It's not a place that, you know, that the man up in the clouds with the beard is going to toss you if you don't do the right thing, or you don't have the right thought, or, you know, you're not hanging with the right people, or you don't love the right person, or whatever. But then if hell is a state of consciousness, so is heaven. So is heaven. We can be in heaven as easily as we can be in that hellish, painful place. And what does it take? It takes practice. It takes changing your thinking. It takes making the decision. It's all the things I talked about at the beginning, right? It's acknowledging the power and presence. It's realizing your relationship to it. It's being receptive. And it's keeping your focus on what is true and not letting yourself get dragged down by the drama and the trauma and the news and the headlines and all the craziness that's going on out there. So, Tad, you said it. Take time for spiritual practice. That's how we cultivate that feeling of being in heaven. Part of that is cultivating a spiritual practice. Whatever that practice is for you, there's lots of different ways to do it. For some, meditation is essential because meditation is that time in the quiet. Now, we can meditate in lots of different ways. My favorite way to meditate is to be out in the woods, walking. Right? That's my thing. I'm closer to source there. I'm not around things that man has created, but things that God created. Meditative time holding my grandbabies. They're super close to the source. You feel it. You feel it. That can be a meditative thing. It's what you choose it to be. It could be listening to a beautiful piece of music and being mindful with what you're eating. There's so many ways that we can live in the presence. It just takes noticing it and wanting to be in that space. Right? Spiritual practice. So we pray, because that's speaking to spirit and that's claiming what it is that we want to see, but then we have to get quiet enough to hear the answer. And that's what your spiritual practice is for. So you do something in the morning, possibly. It doesn't have to take long, maybe 10 minutes, maybe before you go to bed, maybe just something during the day. You look at the clock, and I like when the clock hits numbers, repeating numbers, 11:11, 3:33, those kind of things. If I see that on the clock, I take time in that moment to just remind myself, be in the power and presence. No matter what else is going on, right? Life is good. And so anything that you can do to remind yourself through the day. People used to wear those, what would Jesus do? Bracelets, and when they saw it, it would remind them. And so find something, whatever it is, that brings you back to help you refocus on that. Again, the power and the presence, that strength, the joy, the love, all the good things, and what it is that you want to see in your life. Spiritual practice. Take time for it. Ernest Holmes in the same chapter says, wars will cease, not when God decides this for us, but when enough people know that it's no longer desirable and can steadfastly maintain that position. How many know war is hell? War is a hellish place, and we have all kinds of different versions of that. It doesn't have to be a literal war, but wars within us. Wars that happen between people on our streets, right? That will not end because some God somewhere outside of us says it's enough. It ends when we decide that it is enough. When we take a stand for something higher and something better. From communion with Spirit, man will come to perceive the deeper reality, the broader sharing in the human experience. Right? As we tap in, as more and more people tap in and realize who they are and what we're here to do in this world, it will shift. The whole thing will shift. And what do we call that? Well, I'm talking about paradigm shifts. How many know that phrase? Paradigm shift. That is what's happening right now. All of what we're seeing, what we're seeing when I watch the news, when it pops up on my feed, all this crazy stuff that is happening for a reason. It's having to come to the surface so that we can release it, so that we can recognize it, so we can see it for what it is. And when you shine the light on the darkness, what happens to the dark? It disappears. It disappears. The dark can't exist in the light. It can't exist in the light. So what's happening is that things are changing. The old ways are not going to open new doors. And we here in this movement, those of us in the New Thought movement and Centers for Spiritual Living at Unity, we're the forerunners of this. Breaking down barriers of race consciousness, the accumulated effects of misconceptions and the fears of the universe in which we live. It's for people who are awake and aware to start making the change. It comes from living the change. It comes from sharing with others. Right? It's up to us to do this. And we are the forerunners. We're at the forefront of this movement. And sometimes that's a lonely place. Sometimes that's a lonely place. Which is why we come together in community, so that we remember that we're not alone in this. But as we free ourselves, we are helping to free the whole human race from the bondage of fear, ignorance, superstition, and thoughts based on what the past has brought forth. That race consciousness that I spoke about, where that hell is, and all of that negativity and all of that nastiness, a lot of which is coming, is bubbling up now. We can change that. We change it by changing ourselves. It's an inside job. And as what happens as you change inside? as you change your perceptions, as you change how you see things, the things outside of you seem like they magically change. Ernest Holmes said that too. Change your thinking, change your life. The past is dead, but we are alive. We are alive. Each one of us has this amazing opportunity, these amazing gifts that we have in our lives that so many of us take for granted. And the fact that you all could come here and be here on a Sunday morning, that you have the wherewithal to get here, that you have the health to be here, that's a gift that many others don't have. So use it to its maximum potential. Make the most of this incredible gift that you have. You don't have any excuse anymore because you're starting to wake up, because things are starting to change for you, or you wouldn't be here. Now it's for us to share what we know, and to share it by living it, by being the example of what we want to see. I can't stand up here and talk to you about health and wellness and well-being if I'm not feeling well myself. Right? You would say, who is she? Who is she to talk about that? Just like you're not going to go to a hairdresser with messed up hair. She's jacked up hair. Why am I going to go to somebody who can't fix their own hair? Right? Anybody relate?
Yes.
Yes, we look at those things. You be the example. You can't be telling your kids you need to be living this way if you're not doing it. Right? Or your sister or your friends or whatever. Be the example. Be the example. Live in that love and that light and be that joy that people say, I don't know what she's having, but I want some of that. Right? I want to live like that. That's what we're here to do. To make the most of this amazing gift and be like kids and love life. Live it to the max. Is that useful for anyone?
Yes.
All right.